We're going to be talking about letting go or minimizing fat, especially the bad kinds of fat. And we might even identify the good kinds of fat as well. And what I've realized over the last 12, 13, 14 years, to simplify, is to let go of the habits, the rituals, the commitments, sometimes the people, and the things that no longer serve us. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn. I'm here with my good friend and co-host, TK Coleman.
How do you do from the king of Kalamazoo?
And that laugh track you hear in the background, Alabama is here.
Hi, everybody.
We've got the rest of our team here in the studio as well. And coming up today on this free public minimal episode, we are joined by Dr. Sean O'Mara. He's a performance optimizing and disease reversing physician. He's going to help us answer several listener questions about finding a minimalist approach toward weight loss and minimizing fat. You can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 408, where we answer 5 times the questions. And man, do we dive deep into this subject. That private podcast is out right now. Patreon.com/TheMinimalists. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because advertisements suck. All right, let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Diana.
Hello, Josh, Ryan, and TK. My name is Diana, and I am from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Is there a direct connection between minimalism and weight loss? How has minimalism allowed you to let go of the weight? Alternatively, in what ways does clinging negatively impact the body? Thank you.
Diana, what a thoughtful question. I really see there are 2 parts to it here. I want to hand it over to Dr. Sean O'Mara here in a moment because he's really the expert with respect to this. We're going to be talking about letting go or minimizing fat, especially the bad kinds of fat. And we might even identify the good kinds of fat as well. And what I've realized over the last 12, 13, 14 years, to simplify, is to let go of the habits, the rituals, the commitments, sometimes the people, and the things that no longer serve us. We recently did an episode about food clutter with our friend Dr. Paul Saladino. And in that episode, he talked about the 4 foods to remove. He talked about seed oils and high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners and certain plants from the diet that may be inflammatory. And he also talked about the 4 foods to include in your diet. I think Dr. O'Mara, he will go a little bit farther here and probably even disagree a little bit with some of Paul's stance on a few things. And I think that's great. Having some disagreements on a show like this helps us illuminate what the truth might be. So, Dr. Sean, I'd love to start by talking about different kinds of fat and their implications. If you're watching the video version of the podcast, we're going to be using some images today. This is the first image here. We'll put it up on the screen. If you're just listening to the audio version, though, you can check the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast, and we'll have links to all of these images. Of course, if you subscribe to the email version of the podcast, we'll send these show notes directly to your inbox. Dr. Sean, let's talk about this first image that we have here that folks can see on their screen. And can we talk about the different kinds of fat?
Sure. So right away in this first image, this for the listening and viewing audience benefit shows 6 series of MRI scans that were taken over a period of about 35 weeks. And the interesting thing was in this particular series of MRI scans, we are evaluating visceral fat, which is this dangerous inflammatory fat in the middle. And we were purposing in a study funded by the National Science Foundation to try to identify strategies and biomarkers for reversing chronic disease. So we honed in on visceral fat and we're asking people to do a variety of different strategies in their life to help get rid of visceral fat to measure its impact on chronic disease that they were having. So in this series, you can see in the middle is this red kind of pink colored substance that's right in the center of the abdomen called visceral fat. And the outside is fat in the periphery that we call subcutaneous fat. The interesting thing that happened in this particular series with this individual subject that we're studying was he was reluctant to do all the other strategies. So normally we probably would have asked him to not be a part of the study, but for whatever reason, kind of these mistakes sometimes happen in science. We allowed him to stay in the study, and he only did one thing. He cut out processed foods. So he wouldn't exercise. He would not do any of the other strategies. And at the time, I remember feeling very frustrated with this guy. But in the end, he ended up providing science and us in particular this tremendous benefit because we could see now what happened exclusively when you cut out processed foods from a diet. So we didn't have to worry about what's called confounding. In other words, had we had him exercise, we would be trying to figure out, was it the fact that he cut out processed foods, or was it the fact that he exercised, or he did a sauna, or he did cold showers? So in this case, the only thing he did was cut out processed foods. And in the series of six scans over 35 weeks, you can see the dramatic reduction in that redness. So his visceral fat left, but check out the shape of his abdomen. So he goes from having this barrel-shaped belly sticking out, and he's 68 years old, so he looks like he's got a dad bod. And in that last image, he now has a shape of like a collegiate athlete, like some person in their 20s. So big change over 35 weeks. And that's why we really use MRI a lot in our studies for the National Science Foundation, because it gives such powerful insight into this dangerous substance, visceral fat, that almost nobody knows about. And part of the reason is it's not taught in medical school. So that's part of the problem, that your provider of information that you most trust, typically people are brought up in a healthcare system and trust their physician. They themselves don't even know about visceral fat. So an MRI, if you're able to get one, or a CT scan, provides you that kind of insight into this substance that very few people really know about. So I'm super excited to be here to bring some attention to it.
I think what's going to happen here is we're going to go through several more scans, MRIs, other visuals throughout this episode. I just want to highlight something, getting back directly to Diana's question here. What we're really talking about here is living with less. We often talk about that with respect to material possessions, but also what is the optimal way to live? Well, the optimal way to live is in a state that is free of disease or dysfunction. We see a lot of dysfunction in our lives. Dr. Sean, I don't know if you know this, but the average American household has 300,000 items in it. And that is a manifestation of something else. It's not that the material possessions are inherently wrong or bad or evil. And I want to be clear about this. As a formerly obese person, I used to weigh 80 pounds more than I weigh now. It's not evil or bad if you have excess weight on your body. In fact, it's not even about excess weight. It's about having excess fat, specifically visceral fat, that leads to chronic disease. 90% of the American population is metabolically unhealthy. And we have 70% of people who are considered to be obese or overweight. And that number continues to climb. And a lot of that has to do not with what not just because we're simply overeating, but what we're overeating on, the highly processed foods. And you talked about with this scan, and that's how impressive this is. Simply cutting out one thing. All processed foods led to a dramatic improvement in this person's health. So Diana, I think ultimately that's where we start here. We're talking about letting go of the things that no longer serve us. It could be a ritual, it could be a type of food, it could be a material possession, it could be a person. If it's not serving us, it's okay to let it go. I want to tune into Facebook. We have a question here from Dave.
I am 5'6" and 132 pounds, yet I still have a significant amount of belly fat and fat around my face. How do I minimize the excess fat without trying to go stupidly low in actual weight? I can't believe that in my mid-40s, I need to be below 130 pounds.
Now, Dr. Sean, I know you'll probably address this a little bit differently. I want to put a few things here on the screen first. First, I want to show image number 2 here. This is you And this is a picture of your face at age 48, and then a picture of you at age 59 here. And what we see on the screen is an appreciable difference, a much healthier person on the right side, even though, two things. A, you're considerably older in this picture, even though you don't look older in this picture, but also you actually weigh more. And it seems to me what we often do is we are measuring the wrong things. If you want to lose weight, cut off your leg and you'll instantly walk out. Well, I guess you'll hop out of here weighing less. But Dr. Sean, talk to me about this image and then also image 3. We've got something else where you we can see an appreciable difference in how you've changed personally.
Yeah, that's great. So, minimizing what is really important. So the MRI is sort of like this magic looking glass. It allows you to focus and help you make decisions like what you can jettison and what you should be building. So I love the MRI for being able to do that. So one of the things you want to jettison are things that you're not aware of. You got clutter around your house. You got clutter inside your own house, your internal house, your body, but you don't know about it unless you get scanned to see it. So the MRI allows you to see this very dangerous substance, visceral fat. And one of the places it manifests actually is in your face. So it's one of the most noticeable places, but it manifests throughout the body. So right up front, you can see the change in my face where I'm 48. I have a lot of inflammation, even though I weigh less. During the interval between those two photographs, I jettisoned dangerous inflammatory visceral fat, and you can see it in my face. So I got a leaner face on my image to the right. And then the third image, you can see this profile lateral view. You can see the impact of that visceral fat once it leaves. So interestingly, one of the manifestations of visceral fat is it degrades your muscle performance. So it helps to, first of all, you lose muscle mass. So with a condition called sarcopenia or medical frailty, we start losing our valuable good stuff in our house, your muscle. So that one you want to retain. So when you want to have a more minimalist lifestyle, you got to ask what really is important and hold on to that stuff. And what isn't important, you become aware of, you get rid of. So muscle is really good. And it's not just the amount of muscle, but how well it's performing. So in that first image on the left, you can see my belly sticking out because interestingly, in that photograph, I don't have much visceral fat. But what I do have is a lot of influence from the former visceral fat that weakened my gut. So the dad bod is really weakness where your muscles in your anterior part of your abdomen can't even hold your guts in. So were you to do a surgical procedure and remove that visceral fat right away, your guts still would be pushing out because your muscles can't hold it in. So that second image shows my abdomen has become much flatter. So for the point of the audience listening, really look at what really matters inside of your body. It's not just losing weight. Like Joshua said, you could do that chopping off a particular limb, but you want to jettison the stuff that's harmful to you and hold on to stuff that's beneficial. And so visceral fat is bad fat, but there's also good fat, which is superficial subcutaneous fat. So a little layer of fat just on the outside, we've seen in studies is very protective. And another good fat is brown adipose tissue. We call it brown fat. And that one comes from cold showers, and lifestyle can help to increase that. So, the opportunity to educate, the minimalist podcast audience and have people understand that not all fat is the same. Not all weight is the same. Maybe you're gaining weight, but you're gaining good tissue. Maybe you're losing weight, but you're losing bad tissue. And that's where the MRI, I think, is so helpful.
I think that measurements aren't helpful if we're measuring the wrong thing. If we simply are looking at weight, it doesn't tell me the full picture. Weight of what? Because I first heard about you we were talking about Dr. Anthony Chaffee. And I guess on certain body mass indexes, he might be considered obese because we're measuring it the wrong way. Now, he probably has 8% body fat, and he's a really big athletic guy. But if you just measure weight, it's not really telling you the full picture.
Yeah, that is such a great point. And so, one of the things that is impressive about, there are many things impressive about our country is American commerce. And maybe we could get into that. That's really interesting. It's a good analogy for biology to understand in medical health what's going on in corporate America.
I'd love to get back to Dave's question here directly. So what he's saying here is, hey, look, I weigh 132 pounds, and I can't believe that in my mid-40s, I need to be below 130 pounds. And the fascinating thing is, I see a lot of people in their 30s and 40s when their bodies start to change in interesting ways. It's many years of accumulating visceral fat. And now all of a sudden, I feel like, I'm like him. He's like, even though I'm within this healthy limit, I have a fat face or I have a protruding stomach. And you see that in your images that you've shown here. But you've also shown that it's reversible. Up on the screen here, we have this picture of Dr. Sean. I hope I can look that great tomorrow at age 42. But holy moly, man. So this is you, I guess, a couple years ago, approaching age 60 at that point, and look like a 21-year-old athlete. But the good news is you didn't always look like this way. You didn't always walk around looking like Michael Phelps, and that's clear in the previous picture here. So maybe we can give Dave some hope here.
Yeah, so one of the things I would tell Dave to do as my favorite form of exercise is what we've done ancestrally for 4 million years. The two things that kept kept individuals in the species the longest and also equated to the best quality of life were two things, and that is fighting and sprinting. But fighting is something hard to really advocate as a physician. You know, we joked within our startup that we can have clients go to a bar and get in a fight and actually help to optimize them. But we stayed away from that, and you can exercise in a very intense manner. But the second thing is something everybody listening could consider doing. That is sprinting. So sprinting, when you think about it, is a perfect minimalist activity. So instead of doing the more maximal kind of activity where you're doing long distance running, I started embracing the age of 48 sprinting. And so sprinting will help Dave and anybody listening that's in their 30s and 40s who wants to jettison some of this excess lifestyle that they've accumulated, excess bad fat, visceral fat. If you sprint, that will happen the fastest and the easiest. And the reason is, when you sprint, it releases a messaging molecule called myokines and another messaging molecule called lactate, which is a combination between lactate and phenylalanine. And I hope that's the last time I have to say that because that's a tough word. But lactate is the easier way to express it. And interestingly, they looked at a study, 10 different forms of exercise, and they studied these different forms of exercise for which produces the most lactate. And right at the top was sprinting. The next one below it was weightlifting, resistance training. And at the bottom of the 10 forms of exercise was distance running. So sprinting, seconds of maximum intensity exercise is really the key for Dave and other people that want to burn bad fat and at the same time build muscle. So nothing burns more fat, bad fat, and nothing puts on more beneficial, minimalist type of muscle than sprinting.
And I look at this picture of you, and a lot of that has to do with A, removing the processed foods and not cheating, and then B, sprinting. And I think what we often, when we see a picture like this, like, oh man, it must be 3 hours in the gym every day, and he must be running 5 miles a day. But what you're saying is, and I think this actually tackles Sarah's question here, what's one simple exercise I can do to become fit without spending hours at the gym every day? And what you're illuminating here, Dr. Sean, is the simple answer is rarely the easy answer. Now, I honestly think it's easier to sprint than it is to go on 10-mile runs. And you've got me and my wife doing regular sprinting every other day now.
Awesome.
And it's been a tremendous, after you get past that first little hump, it has been a tremendous way for me to become much more fit. Now, my wife's an athlete, and even she has experienced tremendous improvements in her fitness from sprinting every other day.
Yeah, no, sprinting is such an optimizing form of exercise. And I've averaged my exercise patterns over the past really 12, 13 years, I've averaged about 5 to 10 minutes once every 2 or 3 days. So I really have minimized my exercise, but when I exercise, it's very intense. And, it's much more efficient. So nothing in my mind, I'm not aware of any other form of exercise that will get you more short of breath and give you a higher yield than sprinting in just a few seconds. So, Joshua and your wife, you guys figured that out. And if you look on social media, people that follow this promotion of getting rid of visceral fat and adopted a lifestyle where they've incorporated sprinting, there's just tremendous testimonies surrounding that. So I think the establishment is promoted to the detriment of probably individuals, too much running and too much exercise. Just recently, in the past week, a study came out showing that you can actually grow muscle in just 9 seconds of working out. And the sweet spot appears to be just that, 3 seconds, 3 times a week gives the same thing as doing 3 seconds 5 times a week, and no benefit if you only do it twice a week. So a measurable increase in a very short interval period of time just by doing maximum intensity bicep for 3 seconds, and you do that once 3 times a week. So the more we study the shorter interval and the maximum intensity form of exercise, either with regard to sprinting or resistance training, the more benefit we see. So I'm going to speak to your audience. The bigger danger I feel is maximally exercising too much durational exercise, either working out for too long or doing too much endurance exercise. So if you think ancestrally, for 4 million years, it was brief, it was intense. So struggles, when no one went to the gym, it was a life and death usual fight trying to overcome prey that you needed to feed yourself and your family. So it was quick and it was brutal. And it was over fast. It did not go on for a long period of time. And the same thing with sprinting. We wouldn't have had a purpose for go out and jogging. I know I see these accounts trying to explain, distance running from the perspective of hunting, but, it would have been the sprint to catch it finally and to get away from predators that kept us in the gene pool, the survival of the fittest. So sprinting and very, very brief, intense, maximally intense, I call it MIE, maximally intensive exercise, gives you your greatest return, and it's within the reach of almost everybody listening.
Dr. Sean, a couple of weeks ago, I saw Josh walking into the studio, and I had just parked my car, and he was kind of like 2 blocks away. I wanted to chase him down and tackle him, but then I thought, this is LA. That's probably not a good idea. But what you're saying is I should have done that. That's what you're saying. I should have sprinted, tackled him, and wrestled him to the ground.
This is why I love his YouTube channel. Dr. Sean, your YouTube channel, which we'll put a link to in the show notes. I encourage everyone to check it out because you talk not just about sprinting, or you talk about different types of foods and what foods to remove. And the thing that we've learned as minimalists and have known for a long time is often it's what you don't do is more important than what you actually do. You don't want to eat the processed foods. You don't need to over-exercise or over-exert yourself to the point of hurting yourself or maybe hurting your optimal performance, right? And also, like, you might find that you are disincentivized if you feel that, oh, I have to work out 2 hours a day every day. I'm just going to throw my hands up and say no. With the sprinting stuff, I mean, I've been mixing it up a little bit. I'll do 6 seconds, and I'll do 10 seconds, and then I'll do 12 seconds, and I'll do 4 seconds. And by the time I do 3 or 4 rounds of that, I am wiped out. You talk about running out of breath, but also like, I feel like I've actually exerted myself, right?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it's so wonderfully optimizing. You feel better. But here's an interesting thing. I define health by how you look and how you perform. So if you're listening today and you've never thought about sprinting, take a picture of your face, a good one, before you sprint, and then repeat it after you finish sprinting and look at the interval change. Your face will become more attractive because of the nitric oxide, the myokines, and what gets released. So it really optimizes your appearance and your performance. So that's something you can see in seconds of sprinting a few sprints. You'll have this beneficial impact on your face that you can see and track by photography.
We have one more image here I'd like to put up on the screen real quick. Image number 4. This is an image that shows a profound loss of visceral fat in the abdomen of a 58-year-old who just stopped distance running and switched to sprinting. And this is just a 2-month change. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So in the image on the left, this guy is filled with visceral fat on his image in his left, and he runs a company. And so he had been doing our strategies for the National Science Foundation, and there wasn't much interval change. So I had to ask him, why do you still have all this visceral fat? So I ran through the big contributors that we often see in people that are having visceral fat or being refractory where they can't eliminate it. And that is stress, alcohol drinking, poor sleep, cheating, where they're eating processed foods, especially processed carbohydrates. And he assured me he had none of those. So the fifth thing that we query our client patients about is, are you doing some sort of durational or endurance exercise? So this guy he was doing 10 miles a day running 5 times a week. A day. Wow. So that's 50 miles a week. And he loved it. He was addicted and he refused to stop. And so we had to threaten him with being kicked out of the study. No more free MRIs, no more access to these strategies. And so he agreed to stop running and he immediately started sprinting in place. And look at the dramatic change in this guy. In less than 2 months, he eliminated almost all his visceral fat. But look how much he grew muscle. And when he came back, the MRI tech, I remember, said, "Sean, you're not going to believe this guy. He's now jacked." And when I looked at his MRI images and he walked in the room, he was visibly larger in his muscularity in 2 months. I had to push him up against the wall and beg him to not mess with our science and ask him if he was taking steroids and some sort of anabolics or something that was responsible. Two things. One, it's sprinting, but two, it's the elimination of endurance exercise. So, for the analogy show, it's like shedding stuff from your life that you don't need, getting more to what is really efficient and what is most valuable in sprinting. So he quit running, the distance running, started sprinting, and look at the tremendous benefit he got.
Dr. Sean, I know this is probably so obvious to everyone, but let's do a complete idiot's guide to sprinting for just 1 minute. Because I even heard you say he was sprinting in place. So, okay, that's new to me. We can do that. You don't have to worry about where you sprint. Let's talk about that. But also, what does it look like? Run as fast as I can until I get tired and then I'm done for the day? Or do I need to go a certain amount of seconds and push myself? What does that look like?
Oh, TK, that's so good. So first of all, if you're older, anybody from the 50s, in their 50s and above, you really want to be careful because it's not your age. I'm 60. I can go out and tear it up and I do not have to worry about this one thing, which is a muscle strain. But you have accumulated so much visceral fat that your muscles and your tendons are now vulnerable to getting a very serious strain that could keep you from sprinting for weeks, months, or even more, or even potentially years. So if you are older, you need to be very, very cautious about slowly working with a trainer and starting to sprint. But sprinting basically is what you used to do as a kid, maximum effort running, so as fast as you can. But the injury happens typically when you accelerate. So I tell my clients I videotape them, I tell them to accelerate very, very slowly until they reach maximum effort. And once they've reached that maximum effort, maximum speed, I tell them to hold it for about 6 to maybe 15 seconds. And I tell them to mix it up because ancestrally, this is what kept you in the gene pool, kept you alive, and what allowed you to bring home the bacon, bring home meat, is how fast you could sprint and increase your survival and the quality of your life. Mm-hmm. So nature would do that through variability. We want to avoid muscle memory when you go and work out and do the same. You want to avoid doing the same kind of routines. Same thing with sprinting. So sometimes sprint short, sometimes sprint longer. But I almost never sprint more than about 30 seconds. That would be about the longest. And once in a blue moon, I might do a 1 minute session of sprinting. But typically, my sweet spot is around 12 seconds, 10 to 12 seconds. I mix it up. Sometimes I'll do six sprints. Sometimes I'll do 20 sprints, and sometimes I won't do any. And sometimes I do it every day in a row, and sometimes I go 5 days in a row without sprinting. So mix it up, but it's always the same way. Maximum intensity. Go slow in your acceleration so you don't get an injury. And the other thing I point out is, look how high the mighty have fallen. I mean, think about this. Homo sapiens are the only species in the world that can't run on a dime away from a threat. Old deer, old elk, anything that's got a flea, a predator, can, have its little head down on the ground chewing on grass, and then a big bad wolf pops out and they've suddenly got to take off. It's only Homo sapiens that end up, straining our house because we got to warm up. And let me tell you why. Because you're filled with chronic disease. We've never had more chronic disease in the existence of Homo sapiens throughout our entire history as we have today. And that should wake up everybody. We sit around and we're just enormously diseased, and we become tolerant of this. So I like to challenge people to become aware of just how much disease has invaded your body. And that's the MRI is a great way to take a look at through these biomarkers of this dangerous fat. And then if the fat also invades your muscles. So, we see a condition called myosteatosis, so fatty infiltration of your muscles, so your muscles don't perform well. You can be old and perform exceedingly well. At my age of 60, I can out-sprint a lot of guys in their 20s and 30s. And so it's a very, very interesting capability. It doesn't go to your age, it goes to the level of your health. So you can grow better instead of growing older by being aware of what you got to eliminate, having more of a minimalist perspective on how you regard your health, not just your house, but your house that your soul and your life form occupies, your body, and recognizing your body is your most important asset. So fall in love with that body, recognize it is your most important physical asset, and then have your life lived around the importance of that physical asset so you can take care of it, because it's your body that most defines how well you're going to enjoy every circumstance in the future or suffer the circumstances in the future. How you're living today defines that in the future. So recognize how important that is, and definitely include sprinting as a strategy to help optimize that most important physical asset.
And you can do that in place.
No, he said in place of the long distance running.
Yeah.
He didn't mean running in place, but he's saying his client did it in place of.
So do not run in place. Find a space where you can sprint.
And on that, you can, I tell people to sprint on nice soft surfaces, more ancestrally close to what we did. So grass, you can sprint on sand. There's some very interesting footprints that were, I think close to 1 million years old. These guys running at the level of Olympic sprinter across this soft mud terrain, and they could figure out how fast they were running. So you can run a variety of surfaces, but I tell people to avoid particularly hard surfaces that are unnatural, like concrete. Try to run AstroTurf is one of my favorite surfaces to run on. And then as far as footwear, check out running barefoot. What a phenomenal, my followers and my clients who sprint barefoot, it's such a natural form of sprinting, and footwear becomes this unnatural appendage or addition to our existence. So look for like a lacrosse turf that you can sprint on. Try to sprint barefoot, or the other form I like to sprint in, believe it or not, TK, are moccasins. So I get single layer moccasins. I get them 2 sizes too small. We're size 11, so I buy size 9. I get them wet, and then I put them on. If they've been soaking in water, I put them on my feet wet, and they stretch a little bit to my feet. So it's like custom made moccasins for $56. I get them off Amazon. No financial interest in Amazon, and they come with a sole insert in them, like a cushion. I rip those out, so it's just one layer of leather around my feet. So I think moccasins, and people see me sprinting in gyms wearing moccasins. They're like, look at that dude, he's got moccasins on. And I'm flying like the wind. But so footwear is important. You don't want to be sprinting in really thick, cushioned running shoes that have flared heels and a lot of cushion. Sprint more ancestrally with nice minimalist footwear. That's actually a cool type of footwear is minimalist footwear.
Now, Dr. Sean, you work with clients directly in Minnesota. That's where you live. And this next questioner, I want you to treat her as though she is a client walking into your clinic for the first time. Her name is Jean from Facebook.
I took the machete to my eating habits and made the changes required to lose weight. I lost 85 pounds and have maintained my weight for 7 years. However, I still carry too much visceral fat and look skinny with a big belly. What should I do to get rid of this last unhealthy layer? And how bad is it for my health to carry this additional fat, even though I am considered healthy in all other areas?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I would scan her. And if you're listening and you're in her situation, getting an MRI scan will help you figure out what is going on with your muscles and what's going on in your visceral fat. So assuming she is correct and she has this unhealthy belly fat, which is visceral fat, we're presuming in this particular case, then in addition to sprinting and cutting out processed foods, another really key strategy, like I'm the visceral fat doctor, I'm the sprinting doctor, and the other thing I like to go by is I'm the microbiome doctor. So I love to talk about the microbiome. So I'm a little bit between Dr. Chafee and Dr. Saladino in this regard. So Dr. Chafee is all meat. He just does meat. And Dr. Saladino does meat and he does fruits and honey. None of us do vegetables, but except for me. I eat vegetables, but they must be fermented to get rid of the harmful toxins that I think are very much a threat to our species. I'm an emergency medicine doctor. You're not going to die from eating vegetables, but the mycotoxins, you got to think about the small doses you're exposed to. So I only consume vegetables that have been fermented, and I only consume fruit that has been fermented. So I'm kind of in the middle. So why? Because one, not only does it eliminate the toxins that are in vegetables, and I agree with Dr. Saladino that they're not present in fruit, but there's carbohydrates in there, and I do not believe carbohydrates positively contribute to our species. But the one thing they're missing in, and I think I got Dr. Chafee to at least think about adding in fermented animal products, are fermented foods because of the microbial value. Yeah. So we don't talk about this enough. Dr. Zach Bush, when he was on in Decluttering the Gut, which is an excellent show. If anybody is listening, pull up that Minimalist podcast with Dr. Bush. Very, very well done. And learn about the microbiome. Fall in love with the microbiome besides fall in love with sprinting, because it is the collection of microbes that are either your allies or your enemy, and you have got to figure out what is going on. And it's when we live our lives and we're oblivious to or ignorant of the microbiome, we are living a life that is devoid of exploiting one of the most optimizing strategies that you can have in your life by being aware of these microbes. And so one of the chief ways, besides, I won't go into all the details, I completely agree, cutting out chlorine and antibiotics and food preservatives that are present in processed foods. You got to stop what's hurting your microbiome, but you got to add in this rich diversity of fermented foods that have been around for thousands of years, traditionally consumed by people and cultures that are very healthy. And if you're listening today and you got cravings and you cannot get rid of this belly fat, you must start consuming and fall in love with fermented foods, because these microbes go down and disrupt the microbes that are causing you to cheat and to eat things that you know are bad. And you're powerless. You can't stop eating that stuff. It's because of belying it, you have an infection with carb-loving microbes that are inside of you that create restlessness and convince you that you might even die if you don't eat this bad food, this craving carbohydrates that are in front of you. So add in awesome good guys, fermented foods, kimchi, kvass, fermented sauerkraut, not pickled and not processed and not pasteurized, but true, live, cultured, fermented, raw, living fermented foods. Those are the kind of words that you want to look for. Get them in your gut. If you hate them, boy, that is the best signal. You need them. If you hate them, you need them, because it's the microbes inside of you that are telling you to hate them. They may tell you to hate the taste. They may tell you to hate the smell. They may even tell you to hate the appearance. But those are the ones you got to get started. Very, very small. These are microbes, so you don't have to, it's not an entree. You don't need a lot of them. You can dip your finger, just like I was explained before, into a little kimchi juice, lick your finger and drink it down with some spring water, and you just put good microbes into your gut.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I like the caveat there, because quite often when we get really excited about something, what happens is like, oh, I'm just going to eat an entire thing of sauerkraut or kefir or whatever. And then people get sick from that. Say, oh, it must not work. And it's like, well, no, your body was not ready for all of the super abundance of microbes. And it's like sprinting, right? If you go sprinting all the way out the very first time, you can injure yourself. You can do the same thing with your gut with fermented foods. If you're not taking it in like micro doses, at most it's a condiment that helps with the gut microbiome. It is not your entree.
Yeah, super, super good point, Joshua. So I tell people to get started, slowly introduce it. And I tell them also to think about your microbiome like Noah's Ark. So 2 of every species. So you want a variety and small quantities. So I educate my followers and social media to that. It's Noah's Ark. You want to take that approach. Very, very small amounts and a large variety. And recently I just got my microbiome sequencing back, and the CEO of the company called me up and said, or texted me, said, the chief science officer wants to talk to you about your results. And they sent me this report, and they say, you have one of the healthiest microbiome sequences we have ever seen in our company. So that was great affirmation for me as, the microbiome doctor. I'm trying to, really promote awareness of the microbiome and to have that kind of favorable sequencing done. But, to be honest with you, we don't understand completely all of the diversity of these microbes down there.
That's
but
right.
We get them besides just through fermented foods. We get them just by what we did, when we greet each other, we hugged each other, we were swapping microbes.
That's right.
Look at my hair standing up. That was some good stuff. I was like, this crew is awesome. And I was thinking that, when I'm swapping with them, I'm like, I'm getting good microbes. But you can also get bad microbes from people. So, you want to be around people that are healthy, they're living their lives in an awesome way. And so there's so many ways that we collect these healthy microbes beyond just food that we can either help ourselves or hurt ourselves depending on what we get exposed to.
I'm hearing a couple of key takeaways so far today. The big one that really stands out to me, I think probably the biggest thing that changed my life, was removing the processed foods. That's seed oils, it's the processed carbohydrates. It's everything, 90% of when you go to the grocery store, processed foods. Even in the health food aisle, it's mostly processed garbage. And so completely, 100% eliminating all processed foods. But then the second thing you mentioned, sprinting on top of that. These are 2 minimalist approaches toward minimizing fat, especially the visceral fats that are creating the chronic disease, the dysfunction in our lives. TK, before we move on to some questions on the private podcast, do you have any additional insights or questions for Dr. Sean?
Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned for people that struggle with a lot of these addictive foods is you say, you're probably infected with carb-loving microbes. I'd like you to explore for a little bit this idea that the food we eat comes back and thinks for us, makes decisions for us, and feels for us. And we're kind of giving up our power by allowing these foods to control us in all of these strange ways.
Ooh, hombre, that is such a killer question. So important.
Hey, I feel pretty good.
What great insight you're pulling together very quickly. You're an early adopter. So these microbes have to influence the host. They can't leave the host. would it make sense for a species of organisms, life forms, that pre-existed before Homo sapiens and lived in other species to then migrate into Homo sapiens when we arrived and not be able to influence the host and the ability to get their sustenance? So that's exactly what's going on. How they do that, we don't know. They are so much more advanced than we understand. Anybody who's listening that knows about CRISPR, the brilliant and genius design that microbes use, single-cell organisms use to identify threats and record and maintain that capability and the formula to reverse that threat is so elegant. And so while we are in awe of it as medical scientists about the potential for CRISPR, that these single-cell organisms, and yet these same, impressed medical scientists can't figure out that these organisms are also influencing the host, and that's exactly what they're doing. So they create this craving that you're going to die if you don't consume this food. But the truth is, they're going to die if you don't consume it. Homo sapiens, macronutrient, essential macronutrients are fat and protein. It's not carbohydrates. But the organisms that are obesogenic, meaning generating obesity, and pathogenic, other forms of pathology inside of you that interests are inimical to you. And if you don't understand like how inimical it can be, Google cat rat toxo. Cat-rat toxo is the phenomena of toxoplasmosis, which is a single-cell organism that infects rats and completely undermines and rewrites their inherent fear of cats, gets them sexually aroused so they walk prominently around a cat so that they get eaten by the cat because toxoplasmosis can only reproduce inside the gastrointestinal lining of a cat. Wow. So these microorganisms absolutely influence our behavior. It's just that we don't spend enough time about it. And why? It's like if Dr. Sean is really accurate, how come I never heard about this? Well, read about it. I'll have a simple answer. The system, healthcare, big pharma, doesn't want you to know about the benefits of the microbiome. They want to first understand it, try to figure out pharmaceutical products to make money off of it. And I love this show that you guys don't take sponsors because it's high time we start getting the truth out there and not pushing money. So these microorganisms, whether they're good or bad, are inside of us, and how you live your life decides and really predicts how you're going to live in the future and your level of health. So you're exactly right. They influence us. And I was a medical examiner, state of Virginia, prior to moving to Minnesota. And we learned about single vehicle accidents in young males, oftentimes driving motorcycles that would crash their motorcycle at an insane speed. And they were oftentimes infected with toxoplasmosis. So we've seen that in studies, but we need to pay more attention to how these organisms influence our diet and how we live. In fact, one study shows people who exercise have a certain species of microbes that increase their motivation for exercise, and the people that don't have that motivation are missing those particular species of microbes. So we will eventually see that these sequences also, these particular species, influence your motivation for choosing wisely how to eat, whether you're going to go into a sauna, whether you're going to go into endure a cold shower, or whether you're simply going to sprint or do other awesome things. These microbes influence your health. So I'm doing the very best I can to be as selective as possible about what goes inside my body and what goes on my body so I can get the greatest collection of these microbes that are beneficial to me and prevent bad ones from coming on me or into me.
So I'm going to tell you the title that I will use to describe you to my friends. You are the nutritional exorcist. People have allowed their bodies to be hijacked by these tiny little organisms that take over their thinking and cause them to engage in self-destructive behaviors. And you come in and you give people the information necessary to purify, to rid their body of this stuff. that's thinking for them in a way they don't want to go.
That's awesome. I tell I have an identical twin brother. He's not a physician, but he gets this, and he and I talk a lot, and he's had a lot of time to listen to his physician, crazy Sean brother. And I said, we call them zombies. These people are just like zombies walking around with these microbes controlling them. And, if that's your sense, what you're seeing, that you just don't have control on your life. And you know what we see in clients that get rid of visceral fat and start optimizing their microbiome is they start eliminating addictions, pornography, gambling, alcohol, drugs. These addictive type of behaviors start being eliminated from their lifestyle as they start optimizing their microbiome, improving their health. The optimized, healthy man and woman lives a disciplined life of high performance. They do not allow distractive, addictive, damaging behavior in their life. And as they leverage their microbiome and their health, they're able to live exceedingly well. And that, if you're listening, is the message of nature that has been around for millions of years.
Your cravings are not your cravings. They're influenced by what's going on in you and around you. That could be a craving for alcohol. It could be a craving for material possessions, especially the ones you saw in an advertisement. It can be a craving for carbohydrates. Your craving isn't necessarily your craving, meaning you want it because you feel as though it's going to do something beneficial to you, for you. But quite often the opposite is true.
Yeah.
It's going to harm you in a myriad ways that you can't calculate right now because the impulse of I have to have it right now is so strong that it begins to zero out the cognitive and emotional response that you would have to it that says, no, that is actually bad for me. Let me set this down. Let me pause. Let me stop. Let me disregard that. Because if I say yes to this right now, yes, I'll get a burst of pleasure, but I'm going to pay for it in the not too distant future. All right, y'all, we'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 408. Dr. Sean was there the entire time, and boy, did we dive deep into several different questions with respect to minimizing fat, the gut microbiome, optimizing health, getting rid of disease and dysfunction, and so much more. You can check that out at patreon.com/theminimalist, or just click the link in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You also gain access to all of our podcast archives, all the way back to episode 001. And if you're still on the fence, Patreon is now offering free trials. So if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can do so for free for 7 days. Patreon.com/theminimalist. Big thanks to Dr. Sean for joining us today. You can check out his website, his YouTube channel, his Instagram. We'll put links to those in the show notes over at theminimalists.com. By the way, get on our email list over there. That way we'll deliver your show notes directly to your inbox every Monday as the episodes come out. Big thanks, Dr. Sean, for joining us today. That is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Love and light, my friends.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.